Well, the religious framework is a consequence of the acceptance of a hierarchy of depth. And so religious language emerges when you talk about what's most foundational. Okay, so let me tell you a couple of things that you'll find extremely useful, I think. Okay, so first of all, Mount Sinai is the horizontal and the vertical axis. Now, most of the mythological representations of what you're describing collapse the hierarchical and the divine. They raise the divine above the hierarchical. So the hierarchy extends up to the divine. So there'd be king. So imagine there's you, family, community, town, state, nation, king, God. Right. Now, but God is even more complex than that, because there'd be king, there'd be explorer, there'd be hero, there'd be father, there'd be God. So that's the heavenly hierarchy. Okay. And God is the thing that's at the top of that. And it's ineffable. It's the good as such. You see that in Jacob's ladder. So what happens in Jacob's ladder is that Jacob's a very bad man. And he leaves home. He leaves the domination of his interfering and corrupt mother. And he leaves, and then he swears to change. And he builds an altar, so that's the vertical axis. And it's a representation of Mount Sinai. He builds an altar. He swears that he'll make the appropriate sacrifices, which is what you do when you say you'll change. And then he has a dream of the ladder reaching up to infinity with the angels coming down, right? And the angels that come down are, you could call them avatars of conscience and calling that descend from the divine, right? And so that's Jacob's ladder. And so it's the establishment of the knowledge of that hierarchy of value in Jacob's life as a consequence of his vow to change. And so the intuition that we have of depth in the literary realm is an intuition that different fictional representations portray different levels of that hierarchy. So there's shallow entertainment, which is what we've been talking about with regards to. Right. And there's deep entertainment.
Oh, that's good.
And depth has a nature. That's the thing. Depth has a nature. And so your intuition with regards to this dimensional structure is, see, it's also the case that, well, I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that for the time being. But it's very useful to know that Mount Sinai has this. Mount Sinai is the symbolic representation of the vertical and the horizontal axis. I'll give you a cool example of that. So in the story of the golden calf, this is dead accurate, dead on to what we're discussing. So Moses is allied with Aaron, right? Moses is slow of speech. He's not charismatic exactly, can't communicate that well with ordinary people. And God tells him, when he encounters God in the burning bush, which is something that calls to him, God says to him, Moses says, I can't be a leader because I can't speak. And God basically says, that's your problem. That's for you to sort out. You still have to do it. And then he gives him a hint. You could ally yourself with Aaron. That's like the separation of church and state. That's a good way of thinking about it. So now Moses has a political element. That's Aaron. And they collaborate. Okay, now later, as the Israelites make their way through the desert when they're lost, Moses leaves to get the 10 Commandments. So that means that the spiritual departs. And the Israelites, who are lost and slavish, right, and fractious and resentful, they don't have the habits of civilized, self-governing people. They immediately collapse into a self-serving, drunken hedonism. That's the worship of the golden calf. So and Aaron offers that to them. So the idea is that if the political becomes divorced from the divine hierarchy, the system collapses into an orgiastic hedonism, which of course obviously that's the case. Right. So this idea is as old as time.
And I like this idea. You're bringing a dimension of depth. We feel lifted up by great literature, great art.
Yep.
A story,
or moved to the foundations.
A story that draws us in, and we contemplate, we experience archetypal human patterns and emotions over time. We can feel lifted up. And what happens, what little time I've spent on TikTok or YouTube Shorts, it's just such degrading trash. And many of the boys' feeds end up with a lot of violence in them. That is like, people being punched in the face or kicked in the balls. And because, the algorithm's going to pick up not just what you click on, but it'll pick up how long you watch something. So my sense is that the girls don't end up with a lot of violence in their feeds, but a lot of boys do. And so if you grow up not with literature, not with stories that draw you in for a while, but just with little bits of, sex and violence and people getting hurt, and you do that for hours every day.
Anger is half positive emotion.
It's an approach emotion, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Well, it's got both. Yeah. So it's a high arousal emotion, but it's got that approach element. So of course it's going to degenerate in the absence of anything higher or deeper. That's going to be the degenerative capacity. The question is what constitutes a valid hierarchy of depth? And I actually think that question has been answered. We know what a valid hierarchy of depth is. We talked about it a little bit. It's longer term. It includes more players in the game. It sacrifices the intense pleasure of the present for the future, for the abundance of the future. It's basically what constitutes civilization and the spirit of civilization. And it's painstaking and difficult and requires responsibility and sacrifice. And it has that deeper meaning, deeper because here's a definition of deep. This is worth thinking about technically. The deeper an idea, the more other ideas depend on it for the maintenance of their validity. It's like a hierarchy of games. Yeah, exactly. And so This is also why people don't like to have their axioms questioned, right? Because it disrupts big sections of their That's what happens in trauma.
Right. Okay, so let me bring in another chapter that nobody ever asks about, which is chapter 4 on puberty. And I spend a lot of time in that chapter talking about initiation rites, because most societies, traditional societies have, a girl has to be turned into a woman. Now, girls will, without any socialization, girls will begin to menstruate, they will become fertile. And so societies almost usually mark that point. But for girls, there's a sense that this will happen, and then they have to be inducted into the secrets about sex and parenthood and all those things. Boys, what I learned from my time in cultural psychology, boys is much harder because boys don't turn into men just by getting older. Little boys are kind of like girls, and they're with their mothers. But especially in a warrior society, you have to get them from the world of girls and women to become a man. How do you do that? Well, a lot of toughening. They need a lot of toughening, and it's a long, drawn-out initiation. And we still see this in fraternities and sororities. Sorority initiations, I believe, are universally more mild at any university than the fraternity. The boys go through much harsher rituals. But where I'm going with this is, how do you turn a boy into a man or a girl into a woman? How do you turn a child into an adult of their sex? You have to have some guidance from elders, from someone a little older, who is imparting knowledge to them, who is choosing what they consume in the sense of what stories, what inputs. And while we didn't do a great job of that, I mean, when you and I were growing up, a lot of the messages came from television, but at least those messages were made. None of the TV we watched was by other children. None of it was created by other children. It was all created by people in our parents' or our grandparents' generation. And it often had a moral. And it was, for me, it was very American. It was like, this is part of. So television and movies used to play a huge role in putting in the patterns, the knowledge that you need to be a member of your culture.
And books.
And books, thank you. Yes, of course, and books. So that's why people have cared so much about education and literature, because it's not just the facts you're learning. It's back to our point earlier about the reinforcement learning. if our minds are like an LLM, what are you putting in? Are you putting in movies and books and good television? Or are you putting in little 10-second clips of people getting kicked in the balls? So if you're consuming just millions of little short videos, you're putting garbage in, and your neural network is not going to be very effective. So
not integrated. Not integrated with other people.
That's right.
Yeah.
And no depth. And to bring it back to your point, that the depth of an idea is the degree to which other ideas depend on it. What if you don't have any such ideas? What if all you consumed was little 10-second videos? Nothing is foundational. It's just a whirlwind of dust. There's no foundation.
Yeah, well, that's high entropy. There's no difference between high entropy